noise!
Hello and welcome to another edition of Truth and Rhythm. Brought to you by Funkadelic.net, this is the interview show that gets deep in the pocket with contemporary music's foremost masters of the groove. I am your host, Scott Dr. GX Goldfine, musicologist, creative arts journalist, and multimedia pro. Whether you're watching the video version of this show or the audio-only podcast version, I thank you so much for your continued interest and support in this show. If you enjoy this programming, there are several ways to help support Truth and Rhythm, as well as contribute to further enhancements and expansion, plus get some sweet perks and rewards in the process. First, subscribe to the Funk and Stuff channel on YouTube, which is where Truth and Rhythm lives, and be an advocate by spreading the word among fellow funk, jazz, and R&B music lovers. Second, join Truth and Rhythm's new membership program through Patreon, which features 3 tiers for truth believers, truth seekers, and truth crusaders. You can also submit a direct donation to the cause anytime at funkandstuff.net. At that site, which is loaded with awesome content, you can also purchase the book Everything's on the One, The First Guide of Funk. Shop for official Truth and Rhythm and Funk and Stuff merchandise, and use the Amazon links for all of your online purchases, which allocates a percentage to this show. Sponsorship opportunities are available as well. Contact me directly at scottg@funkandstuff.net. For those of you who go the extra step in supporting the show, you have my heartfelt gratitude for allowing us to continue to shine the light on those special artists whose quest is to find truth in rhythm. I am pleased to welcome to the Truth and Rhythm Mothership guitarist Tracey Singleton, better known as Spacey T. A member of hard rock metal band Sound Barrier since 1983, he has also recorded and performed with acts such as Mother's Finest, Fishbone, OG Funk, Doug Pinnick, 24/7 Spies, Praise the Dead, and The Funk Experience with Billy Bass Nelson and Gary Mudbone Cooper. The man brings together 3 of my favorite things: hard rock, hard funk, and shredding guitar.
Wow, that's awesome.
Hey, welcome to the show, Spacey. How are you?
Hey, great, man. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here. A lot of my heroes have been on here, so I'm honored.
Well, it's great to have you. And where are you today?
I live in Arcadia, California. Been living here for the last 10, 12 years in Arcadia.
So for those who don't really know, I would say that's about 15 miles north west of LA?
Yes, and it's right next door to Pasadena.
Yes, yep,
Yeah.
where the Rose Bowl is, for those who haven't been. Yeah. Well, I don't even know if you know, but I grew up in Los Angeles and mostly went to Santa Monica High School. And
that's awesome.
Yeah. So I was there until 2006. So I grew up going to all those shows in Hollyweird and,
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Were you here in the 80s?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe you saw Sound Barrier then.
I could have. I was at so many shows in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Yeah.
We were all over those clubs in the 80s. That was our stomping grounds.
Yeah. And, I was at, anything that had a wisp of, hard-edged rock, funk,
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't far away. So
That's awesome.
So great to have you. I'm going to start by stepping back a little bit and finding out how you first, gravitated to the guitar and, who some of your early influences were.
Good question. Well, I'm originally from New Jersey. I've been living here in California now longer than where I'm from. From Long Branch, New Jersey, Red Bank, Asbury Park, Tinton Falls, New Jersey. That's where all my family's spread around, and most of my immediate family still live there too. I have relatives out here, which when you fast forward, how I got out here. But growing up in New Jersey, my main influences, the first guitar I ever heard was Wes Montgomery, because my dad is an avid jazz collector, and growing up he played his albums a lot when he was home because he was in the Navy, so he was only home most of the time on the weekends back then. And he'd come home and play music, and I'd hear Wes Montgomery, and I'd go, "Wow, Dad, who is that?" And he goes, "Wow, that's Wes Montgomery. For him, that was his favorite guitar. So, greatest guitar player in the world." And I said, "Wow, someday, man, I want to be able to play like that." And he laughed, this is before he heard me play, and he's like, "Sure, son, if you say so." And today, my dad's one of my biggest fans because he's like, "Wow, son, you blew me away. You could play everything from Wes Montgomery to Animals as Leaders," So it's really great that it's come like that. But going back, after Wes Montgomery, it had to be Jimi Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix, and then I Sly and the Family Stone. And then one of my biggest influences back then, after Hendrix, because I was so sad when Hendrix passed, and I was searching for other people like that and trying to see if there were more people that looked like me that played that kind of music, you know what I mean? So I started, even way back then, becoming almost like a black rock collector way back then. So the next guy right on the list that was there waiting for me was Eddie Hazel. So, and that was a weird story in itself, how I got turned on to Funkadelic. One day I was messing around with a guitar because, for me, my grandmother was our matriarch of our family. She came up to me one day and said, "You're going to play guitar." And I was like, okay. So I started messing around with it, and it's all by ear. I was all played by ear. And I played in open tuning because when I got my first Strat, I handed it to a friend of ours that was in a band, older keyboard player, and he tuned it to open D. And said, "Here you go." And I didn't know what the difference between standard and open D tuning was, so I learned how to play in open D tuning, and I've been doing it ever since. And I can play in standard tuning because today I teach kids in standard tuning and stuff. But for me, I prefer open tuning because that's the way I learned, and I can play anything in that tuning. You know what I mean? From Yngwie Malmsteen to anything in that tuning. So going back. I was messing around with the guitar, and my aunt came home one day with her friend. Her name was Carolyn, and she goes, "Wow, you sound like Funkadelic." And I was like, "Funkadelic? What is that?" And she's like, "You never heard of Funkadelic?" And I was like, "No." And so she went home and got that first Funkadelic album, the round one with the faces. Yep, the one right back there. And she said, "This is Funkadelic." And I was like, "Wow." She gave me the album, and I looked on it, and I looked on the back, and the first name that I saw was Ed Hazel. And it didn't say Eddie Hazel. I'll never forget. It said Ed Hazel guitar. So from then on, anything that had Eddie Hazel's or Ed Hazel's name on it, I would pick it up, And, and there were other guitarists I discovered at the time, too, like Ernie Isley and a few other guys, and which I totally loved and respect. But the guy for me was Eddie Hazel, And he just blew my mind. And I learned everything I could learn by him. And, and I started getting to the point where I can hear what he sounded like. And I can hear his vibe, you know what I mean? And that's the thing that I think that I picked up on more than a lot of other guitar players, the feel and the vibe of different players. And that's what happened, where I started sounding where I could sound like Eddie. And people were saying, "Wow, you sound like Eddie Hazel. You got to meet Eddie Hazel," So my big thing was I was telling people in New Jersey, I'm going to move to California someday, and I'm going to play with Funkadelic. I'm going to play with Eddie Hazel. You know what I mean? So 1978, I moved to California, and I had a friend that moved here a couple months ahead of me, a bass player friend, and we stayed in touch.
Well, let me interrupt you real quick. How far
Yes.
did you grow up from Plainfield?
Not that far. Not that
So
far.
that's
We had a band called To Be Continued in Long Branch, New Jersey. and we were the house band at this club called the Off Broadway. So every once in a while, the owner Sarge used to have other bands come in to play, and one of the weekends he had the Bags come in from Plainfield, and that's when I first met Boogie and Glenn and Gary. They all came with the band because they were all buddies and played together anyway, so they were all there. You know, so I was like, wow. And the Bags even did Funkadelic covers as well. And it's funny because we did one gig to be continued in Plainfield, and I had my thin line Telecaster I took there and left it there, and somebody stole it. That's what I remember about Plainfield, you know. But man, Eddie Hazel was the guy for me. So, and then I discovered a few other guys too. Another guy I discovered right after Eddie Hazel was Ronnie Drayton. Ronnie Drayton and he was on that Edwin Byrd song Supernatural album. He changed my life as well, and I got to meet him years later. And there's a few other guys. Michael Tolles is another influence. I don't know if you're familiar with Michael Tolles, because a lot of people don't know who he is. If you ever heard the Bar-Kays Black Rock album?
Oh, yeah.
You ever hear? Brilliant guitar. He's the guitarist on that record. He's one of my heroes and he was shredding back then. You know what I mean? If you listen to that stuff, today, he still is an inspiration today.
Yeah, Lloyd Smith is who I think of with guitar for them, but he's before Lloyd Smith.
That's just Lloyd, yeah. Yeah, but this guy, he was their, well, I was going to say he was their first guitarist, but he wasn't. Because going back, remembering, I mean, there was the Bar-Kays that passed away with Otis Redding, and then James Alexander put together the Bar-Kays, the Black Rock Bar-Kays, and
right.
That's when Michael Tolles was the guitarist. And he only played on the Black Rock album. After that, he left the band, and then Vernon Birch came in. Vernon Birch played on the Wattstack stuff, and then Luscious Lloyd came in after that. See, so I try to be a kind of like a historian when it comes to this stuff too, because I was trying to follow these people to see if there were more people like me playing the kind of music I was playing, you know. And then I started discovering all of these black guitar players, you know, and I was like, wow. Another one that influenced me a lot was there was a band called Mother Night from New York, Eddie Martinez. Another inspiration back then, you know.
Yeah, way before Run DMC.
Yeah, way before. I mean, Mother Night was such a great band. They only made one album, and it's phenomenal. They reminded me of, I called them back then the Black Chicago, because they reminded me of Chicago. They had a full horn section, but it was like Chicago. Yeah, it was like Chicago, because I mean, you know how awesome Terry Kath was on guitar, so he was like that to me. It was like the black version of Chicago to me. You know, so those were some of my main influences before I came to LA, you know, and not to mention the other guitarists, because I was definitely listening to Black Sabbath and all the other Grand Funk, loved Grand Funk, all of that stuff as well. And not to mention all the funk I was listening to, because the band To Be Continued, we were like a top 40 kind of band that played the hits of the day and the obscure Funkadelic or Sly and the Family Stone songs that we loved as well. You know what I mean?
Wow. When did you first see, I assume you got to see Eddie play at some point?
I didn't get to see Eddie play until I moved out here. And I've only seen Eddie play with Funkadelic one time. And that was when I first moved out here and they played that big funk festival at the Coliseum. And I went there and I saw Eddie, and because we already knew each other by then, and I was yelling. He saw me, and we ended up going backstage, hanging out with him for the rest of the evening, which was pretty cool, you know.
Wow.
That was great. Because Eddie was such a great guy. I mean, he was everything that I imagined him to be and more. And the weird part about it was, usually when you're a big fan of somebody, you're usually chasing behind them every chance you get, right? It was the opposite. Every time I turned around, Eddie's here. Eddie was chasing after me, you know. And it was so weird. I said, I can't believe that Eddie Hazel keeps coming to hang out with me. You know what I mean? And one day he told me why, you know, because he got me the gig with Bonnie Pointer. I don't know if you heard that stuff, but Bonnie's Purple album. That's when I moved to California and ended up. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit, but I was in California for about a month. And my
What year
friend,
is that?
excuse me,
What year was that?
that was 1978. And my friend Raymond called me one day and he said, "Hey man, you'll never guess who I'm playing with." And I'm like, Who are you playing with? Who? You know, I want to know. And Eddie snatched the phone from him and said, "Man, you better bring your butt down here to the studio." And I was like, wow. And I got down there so fast because they were in the studio at SIR in Hollywood. And I was about maybe 10, 12 blocks from there. So I could get there pretty quick. And soon as I walked in the door, he said, "You're in the band." And I'm like, wow, I didn't even play anything yet. And he goes, "You from New Jersey, right?" And I'm like, "Yep." And he says, "You're in the band." And I'm like, okay. So I watched, and the thing is, I have a lot of this stuff on tape because I have, those little old school cheap cassette players they used to have with the little handle I took that down there with me. So I was like, "You don't mind if I record any of this, do you?" And he's like, "Man, go ahead, just take whatever you want." So I set it up and let it run, and he said, "Play something for me, So I started playing all of his stuff back to him. Red Hot Mama, Maggot Brain, Good Thoughts, Bad Thoughts, just all of his. And he's like, "Whoa, you sound better than me playing me." And I was like, "Man, I just want to tell you that I just loved and respected everything you did, and I always wanted to be a part of it." And he was blown away. So
It's a little bit like the Mike Hampton story,
yeah. Only the Mike Hampton story is real interesting too, because they were at a party and he played for them at a birthday party. But I think this was Eddie's last version of the band Kingdom Come that he had, because my friend Raymond was the bass player, and I forgot who the drummer was. But the weird part about that was after all of that happened, I never saw my friend Raymond again, and I never saw that drummer again, and I don't know what happened to them. Next thing you know, I'm in the studio with Eddie doing Bonnie Pointer's album, and that blew my mind because I'm sitting there in the studio, Eddie, we're sitting there talking. In walks Sly Stone. In walks Freddie Stone. And wow. I'm like, Ollie Brown. And I'm like, wow, and it's weird because it's not only like, am I getting to meet these guys, right? I'm getting ready to make an album with them. Something that's down forever, with my heroes, and I'm like.
Had you been in the studio before, ever?
Say it again?
Had you been in the studio prior?
Yes, a few times before, but add three of my biggest heroes there recording with me. I mean, I'm like, I don't want to be that kid that they go, "Okay, son, maybe you need to go home and practice a little bit more." Luckily, I had it together enough where I did it, and it was, wow, and I felt like I got to follow in Eddie's footsteps because on the Bonnie's first solo album, their Red album, there's a song called "Free Me From My Freedom," which featured Eddie Hazel on bass, guitar, and banjo. So on the Purple album, I did a song called "When the Love Light Shines Through His Eyes," that awesome Supreme song that I grew up listening to my whole life. So Jeffrey said, "I want you to play bass, guitar, and banjo on this song." So I did it, and it's beautiful. I don't know if you ever heard it, but it's
banjo?
Yes.
Had you ever played banjo before?
Nope, I never played it before that. But all I knew was Eddie played it on the album before, and I had to live up to what he did, And the gratification was when they first played it all back, I was sitting there and they were playing it, and Freddie Stone comes running in the room and goes, "Wow, who played that banjo on that song?" And I was like, "I did." And he's like, "That's a great banjo part." And I was like, "1 second." I had to run in the bathroom and say, "Wow, Freddie Stone said I played it great." But I was freaking out, really. I had to keep my composure because I worship Sly Stone, Freddie Stone, and Eddie Hazel like nobody's business. So and Sly used to call me son in those sessions. So I was like, and because of him, I got some really great things. There was an instrument out at the time called the ARP Avatar, which Michael Hampton used on the Funkadelic album. And I was telling Jeffrey Bowen, the producer, about it, and I said, "Jeffrey, man, there's this thing out, Michael Hampton uses it, and ARP Avatar." And I said, "Man, can you please, I'd love to use that on the album, somewhere." And then he looked at Sly and he goes, "Sly, should I get in this thing?" And Sly goes, "Yeah, get it." And he got it for me. And I said, "Well, thank you, Sly." I couldn't believe it, man. And I still have that ARP avatar. I sent it back home to New Jersey, but I still have it.
Wow.
I didn't get to use it on the album, but I used it on some of the band I was with at the time. We were called Lightyear Flight, and I used it on those sessions. And it was crazy because, man, I'm going to write a book. There's so many stories I could tell you that it's just ridiculous. Each one of these things I'm telling you branches off into their own stories as well, you know?
Wow. So
Which is crazy.
back then, at the height of their popularity, I mean, how much experience did you have meeting any of the other Funkadelic members?
Well, that's a great question as well, because we were at my house playing one day, and Eddie was playing guitar, and I picked up the bass, and I started playing all of Billy basses and Bootsy and all of, see, because I studied Funkadelic music like the back of my hand, you know, so I started playing this stuff while Eddie was playing guitar, and he put the guitar down and says, "Come with me." And I'm like, "Well, where are we going?" He's like, "Just come with me." He took me to Billy's house, and he said, "Billy, listen to this guy playing your parts." And I started playing for Billy, and he was like, "Wow." It blew him away. So then from that, I ended up playing with Billy bass. I played bass with Billy, and he played guitar. He took my guitar, played guitar. He had two other lead guitar players, and I was his bass player for at least 2 years. And then we switch off, you know, and then he played bass, and then I played guitar. But most of the time when I played with Billy, I played bass with him. You know, and now fast forward with Muddy and all them, I'm back to playing guitar. You know, he's on the bass, and I never seen him smiling so much. He's so happy. We were getting ready to take off with this Funk Experience thing until the
Pandemic
COVID stopped everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I know you guys did like a spotlight show not far from me in Asheville.
Wow, I wish I could have met you there. That would have been awesome.
Yeah.
Next time we do it, you got to come hang out with us.
Yeah, no doubt. It's a date. So when you were hanging out with those guys back, that was in the late 70s then? Is that?
Well, when I Bags and those guys?
Yeah.
I met Eddie in 1978, and I met Billy, it had to be late 78, 79 that I met Billy. We've been friends ever since, you know.
What's a lot of people see him as being a little, you know, irascible, or he's certainly a character. And
Yeah.
What's the secret to sort of getting along well with Billy?
Just love and respect. Because, see, what happened with Billy, when I first met Billy, I was starstruck. So he used to curse me out all the time because I used to say, "Man, you're Billy Bass, man. I want to play with you. I'll do anything." He's like, "Man, I wish you would stop that shit, man. You need to cut that out." And what he was meaning by that was he was putting me on the same level as him, but I was putting him on a pedestal, you know? And I couldn't help myself. I was starstruck, you know? And Eddie wasn't like that. Eddie was the complete opposite. Eddie smiled all the time, always laughing, to where Eddie just made you feel more comfortable. But Billy, though, but see, now that I've known Billy so well now for so many years, we just have so much mutual respect for each other. And once I realized that he was putting me on the same level as him, I was good, you know? And now it's just, like I said, it's nothing but love and respect. We talk a lot on the phone, too, a lot. I love Billy with all my heart, man. I'd do anything for him, you know?
When did you first meet George Clinton?
I first met George Clinton when I was playing with Fishbone. We used to do some shows. We did a few shows, and we opened for them here out in California. And that's when I first met George. Because, I mean, that's when I first met George. Because after that, we did a NAMM show, and we did the Goose at the, I forget what booth it was, and George came up and played with us, and that was pretty cool. And then he also sang on our album, the Nutworks album that we did. We did Everybody is a Star. And I think that's the last official recording of Rick James is on it, Gwen Stefani's on it, and George Clinton. And Angelo and them all took turns singing the verses on Everybody's a Star. I don't know if you ever heard that. but it's
Wow.
pretty fun. The name of the album was the Psychotic Friends Nutworks Fishbone album that I did with them on Hollywood Records.
Yep. Okay. Yep.
And we had a bunch of guests on that record.
Yep.
Great stuff. And that was our first and only record with Hollywood Records.
So let's go back to how did things get lined up for Sound Barrier?
That's a great story. Well, we're talking, the band got together in like 81, and we started playing the club scene. All the clubs in LA, Hollywood and Orange County and all these different clubs. And we were playing at this one club called Madam Wong's West in Santa Monica. And the record company came to see a band that was playing upstairs. I forgot who it was, but we were playing downstairs at the time. And they was leaving and heard us and said, wow, who are you guys, and the next thing you know, they were talking about they wanted to sign us. And it was the people from MCA. And it was like, wow, that's real interesting. So it took us, it took about a year before we actually went in the studio after that meeting, So it was weird because once we did sign and did the record and everything, Lee DiCarlo was the engineer, Skip Drinkwater, who did a lot of fusion with the producer. And the label just, another case of didn't know what to do with us,
How did you guys find each other though? Because obviously there weren't a lot of black guys doing metal at that time. So but you guys had that connection and that mutual respect and love for that music. How'd you come together?
Well, at the time, I was doing TV shows. I was playing with Bonnie Pointer, and we had just done Don Kirshner. We got to do all those shows, Don Kirshner's rock concert and Midnight Special and all those shows. And at the same time, there was a band called Callure playing the local club circuit. And Bernie, the singer, was one of the background vocalists in Callure. Mm-hmm. So somehow I had some friends that knew them and had me meet them. And I told them I played guitar, and they wanted me to audition. So I auditioned, and then I joined Callure. So we started playing the club circuit for about a few years. And our music started, once I started contributing to the band musically, the stuff started getting a little louder and a little heavier. And we had a female vocalist. And she started saying, wow, you guys are starting to get too loud and doing this, and maybe you should start another band. And she kept saying, So we decided to start another band. So Bernie and I left the Callure thing. It was falling apart kind of anyway. And we started looking for drummers and bass players. And we found Dave Brown, our drummer. And at the time, we had a different bass player. His name was Keith. And he played with us for a little while, and he left the band because he was afraid to play with us because his friends would make fun of him like, oh, man, you're in an all-black band playing rock music. And I was like, and? But he couldn't handle it, so he left. So our drummer Dave at the time, he knew Stanley E., who ended up being our main bass player, and he brought him in. And as they say, the rest is history. Stanley and I became so close friends that we're like brothers to this day, right now. And when Sound Barrier broke up, we stayed friends. And we did a lot of other projects together until Sound Barrier got back together. We had split.
What was your vision and ambition for the band when you put that first record out?
The vision was to kind of carry on, kind of like what it crossed between Sly Stone and the Band of Gypsies was doing, you know what I mean? But make it a little bit harder. And just because that was the main influence for Sound Barrier. When I saw the Band of Gypsies, I was like, wow. I mean, because I loved the experience. I loved it so much. I mean, but when I saw the Band of Gypsies, I was like, wow, you can do that? You can have three black men in a band together, and it's okay? I couldn't believe it, Because, I mean, Sly Stone, he made it, he opened up a lot of doors. I was shocked when I first saw his band with the females and black and white, and I was like, wow, that's an ideal band right there, you know. So that was the thing, to try to keep that thing going, that Hendrix, Sly Stone kind of positive vibe going. Because when we first started, we were about partying. We weren't like political hardly at all or none of that stuff. But as life went on and as we started getting flack for being like black, playing rock and playing metal and all that stuff, we started getting a little more political with the music, because I couldn't believe that people, you know, was telling us all this stuff, especially when by that time I really knew that it all started with Chuck Berry and Little Richard, and we were trying to carry on in that tradition as well. You know what I mean? So it was like, well, I don't see why there's so much flack against us doing what our ancestors set out for us to do.
And were you you know, hip to, like, you know, Bad Brains and
Oh yes,
you know, Bus Boys and things like that?
yes. See, like I said, each one of these things branch off into stars. I have stories for both of those things that you just said. Like, I ended up years later playing with HR. Me and HR are like best friends. I played in a bunch of his bands. The last time I played with him was with 2015. He came here because he lives in Pittsburgh now, I think. And he came back to LA and we did a little West Coast tour. And he's talking about us getting together again. And hopefully I'm going to finally get to record with him, because I played with him for years but never got to record anything. I mean, live shows, but I mean studio recordings, you know what I mean? And then what you said about the Bus Boys, Victor Johnson joined Sound Barrier. He was in Sound Barrier for about a year and a half. And right before the Sammy Hagar thing, right before we went through all our stuff, like I was in the Mesa Boogie store in Hollywood, and Victor was in there. And I said, you know what, man, we should get together and do something together. So I brought him. He used to come to my house. We worked out all the Sound Barrier songs, the double harmonies and all this stuff. And then I brought him in, and they were like, what do you want another guitar player for? And I said, I'm going to show you. And then we were like really like the Black Judas Priest thing, because people used to say that we reminded them of a Black Judas Priest. But it was really like that then, because we had the two guitars and the harmonies. And it's funny that that's another story within itself, too, because when we used to play at the country club, our stomping grounds in Reseda, California, Judas Priest came to see us play. And they loved it. They loved it. And they invited us to the US Festival to come and watch them play at the US Festival.
Were you fans of theirs?
Totally, 100%. And that's the thing about us. See, a lot of people don't realize that. They think that, you know the old stigma that we all listen to, you know, R&B and all this stuff. But we did. But I was fans of R&B, funk, every kind of music you can imagine, metal, thrash. I mean, I've been through it all of it. I mean, and that's the thing that black musicians that play rock have to do. I must have reinvented myself hundreds of times. You know, I could show you, if you saw some of my photo albums, like hundreds of reinventions. You know what I mean? To play these different styles of music. You know, I've been through the reggae scene. I got all my Rasta friends and the whole like funk scene.
You gotta be versatile. Super versatile.
You know what's funny though? They don't all mingle with each other, but I'm in all of those circles. You know, because when I was in the reggae circle, for example, like they say, oh man, the rock music is just too loud and there's too much guitar and too much this and that. But the funny thing was, when I played in this, one of my favorite local reggae bands here called Boom Shaka, Trevi Felix, who passed away a few years ago, the leader of the band, he wanted me to do all of that stuff. And when I played with Ross Michael, he's the Rasta man that's the king of the Funde drums that taught Peter Tosh and Bob Marley and all of those guys. When they do the Rasta man chant and they have the Funde drums, boom, 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 boom. They got that from Ross Michael, who I played with for years as well. And he loved it too. He said, man, when you play like that, you make me feel like I'm on Don Kirshner's rock concert. And I said, well, is that okay? You want me to? And he said, yes, man, keep going. Mm-hmm. So, you know, some of those people love that stuff, but a lot of Rastas did not like it. They're like, too much rock, too much. It's not about glorifying the guitar. But if you watch some of those bands, they did glorify the guitar. Look at Peter Tosh. Peter Tosh had some of the most awesome guitar players that played with him. And they were influences on me too. There was one brother, his name was Ed Alzea. If you ever watch this footage of Peter Tosh live in Brazil, and he's wearing a Jimi Hendrix t-shirt, and he is destroying the guitar. And that's the thing that when I first started playing reggae, when another Rasta friend of mine, Freddie Flint, who passed away, he said, man, if he can do it, you can do it. That's the first video he gave me when I first started learning reggae music. And he said, that's you. And I was like, whoa, that guy does sound like me. And so it let me know that I could fit it in. And once you know all the little techniques of all these different styles, you could fit right in. But you got to really study it. You know what I mean?
You got to have the foundation down in order to augment it. Yeah.
Nothing like that jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah.
You know, because I've seen a lot of people play reggae that they don't play it right. You know, they're doing all these upstrokes and all that, and it's not a lot of upstrokes, but they just think that that's what you got to do when you play reggae or ska. You got to go upstrokes, but it's not that. If you watch like the kings of reggae guitar, like Al Anderson and all these guys, they're not playing upstrokes like that, you know what I mean? But I've seen so many people say, I'm playing reggae, and they're doing these upstrokes, and I'm like, that's not it. You know, but much love and respect, you know, in any way a person can pull it off, I guess that's what you got to do, you know?
Hey, Spacey, I want to mention a little bit more about that first Sound Barrier record for, you know, funk fans and soul fans that watch or listen to this. They may not be aware of it. So I want to, you know, it came out 83. And, you know, some of my favorite tracks on that were, you know, Rock Without the Roll.
Wow, you liked that? I didn't realize that you was a fan of that stuff. Cool.
Second Thoughts.
Oh, yes.
I really, the instrumental breakdown on that is fierce.
Wow.
And Don't Put Me on Hold, you know, that brings like custard pie to mind for me.
Yeah. That was kind of like a tribute to Van Halen a little bit too.
Yeah, and some Zepp too.
Some background vocals and stuff, yeah. Wow, man, I appreciate that. I didn't realize that you were that much into the record, man. I love that first record too. There's some really good stuff on there that I was really proud of when we did it, you know?
Yeah, and you covered a Nefty song on there.
Yes, and now that's a whole nother story too.
He's been on the show.
Get into that. Him and I got bad blood from some situations after that, you know?
Oh.
That is just really crazy stuff, you know?
Hmm.
And I'm a pretty positive person, so I like to just keep it positive. I'll just leave it at this. Him and I we did a project together. It was supposedly for Kanye West a few years back, and it just never happened. It never. And we spent all this time on this project that just nothing ever came of it, you know. And I just left it at that.
All right. Well, so after this record came out, you know, who'd you guys tour with, and what happened with the group?
Well, that's another great question, because we had Miller Beer was sponsoring us at the time, and we had a couple of other sponsors, and Triumph, the Canadian rock band.
Trio, right? They were three of them.
Yeah, they wanted us to tour with them, and the record company wouldn't support it. So the sad part about Sound Barrier is we never really played outside of LA. We've only did one gig out of town, and that was in San Francisco. And I forget where it was in San Francisco, but the thing that I remember about it the most was that that's where I met Donnie Harvey, the bass player from Automatic Man. One of my favorite bands of all time. And Donnie Harvey, like he welcomed us with open arms, and we became friends up until when he passed away. And that made me so sad when he passed away, you know? Because that's another influence that I didn't mention from early back in the day, too. I was listening to Automatic Man in like 1975. Pat Thrall is one of my greatest guitar influences, right up there with Eddie Hazel, you know?
Wow, it's funny. You know, I know Jimmy Hazel is a friend of yours.
Yeah.
And he's got so many of the similar influences, too.
Yeah. Oh, him and I are brothers, really. We're like, I used to say he's my right arm. And if you know Greg Fulton from Chicago, he's my left arm. Great people. Great. I love those guys dearly. We actually, Jimmy and I, and Doug Pennick from King's X, Greg from Chicago from Cyclone Temple, Rick Skater. We were supposed to have a band together, but we couldn't pull it off. It was too hard because everybody lived in separate places, and we couldn't get in that. You know how back in the day, the best way to do a record like that was to everybody get in the same room and bang it out. You know, we weren't able to do that, so it just kind of fell apart. Maybe in the future we could do it again, though. Try to do it again, you know.
Okay. So you guys did one more record in the 80s, right?
Sound Barrier?
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, we did two more, actually. Born to Rock was the EP that we put out next.
In 86, you had a full album, though, yeah.
Yes, you're talking about the Speed of Light record.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the weird record for us.
Weird how?
The beginning of the end of Sound Barrier right there.
Oh.
And it's weird because I think we picked up a lot of fans from that record. But personally, the band, we can't stand that record because, number one, I'll try to explain it as quickly as I can. Number one, our bass player was fired. That's when Stanley got fired from the band. We got a bass player from Romania. His name was Emil Lek, who was in a band called Terra that we used to be friends. We were friends with. They used to do a lot of gigs together back then. And Stanley made a comment once. He said, "If I ever quit the band, you should get Emil to play bass." So when he left the band, they got Emil to play bass. And like I said, it was the beginning of the end because he was a kind of like a Jaco Pastorius, Steve Harris clone. Those are his two idols that he loved. And it's like we started sounding like that to me. It's like Iron Maiden on that last record. And I love Iron Maiden, but I didn't want us to start sounding like other bands, you know what I mean? And at the same time, they were planning to throw me out of my own band at that time, too. And I had friends, I was endorsed to Jackson Guitars. This is funny. And the guys from Jackson called me and told me, they said, "Man, these guys are getting ready to fire you, and they want Alex Mossy to take your endorsement." Because Alex Mossy's the guitarist that replaced me in Sound Barrier. And once Alex got in the band, they couldn't keep calling it Sound Barrier because Alex Mossy was his own strength and his own guitar, so they ended up changing the band's name to Mossy after him.
Okay. And
then they made one album, and then Alex fired them. Bernie called me one day and said Alex fired him and Dave because he thought them being black would stop him from doing what he needed to do. And I was like, wow, that's crazy,
I definitely prefer the first record, but I do like On the Level.
Well, you should have heard On the Level the way we used to play it live when Stanley was in. See, and that's a whole nother issue. A lot of those songs on that album, Stanley wrote with me, but didn't get the credit. And I had a big fallout with our manager, which was our singer, Bernie's brother, Charles Kimball, was our manager at the time. And him and I had a big fallout over it because I was like, how come you didn't give Stanley credit for these songs he wrote with me? You know what I mean? And like I said, that was the beginning of the end of Sound Barrier right there. So right after that, they fired me, and after Mossy, and then that whole thing just fell apart. So then 30 years later, here comes Tom Morello talking about how he's such a big fan of Sound Barrier, and he got us back together.
Yeah, I saw the clip of that on YouTube of him introducing you guys a few years ago, and that was a really cool tribute. And it was great to see you guys back doing it again.
Yeah. I love Tom, too. He's a great guy, man. I had no idea. Because when I was in Mother's Finest in 92, the drummer Dion, Joyce and Glenn's son, used to listen to Rage Against the Machine all the time on the bus and stuff. And he go, "Man, you got to listen to this Tom Morello guy. He's the next Jimi Hendrix." And I was like, I don't know about that, but I like what he's doing,
Different, innovative.
Fast forward a few years later, me and my girlfriend Lisa Marie and our band Praise the Dead, we had some friends that she knew that we met in Fairfax, and we lived in this house together on Fairfax in California. and she was working for this company called Axis of Justice. Axis of Justice was the company owned by Tom Morello and Serge Tankian from System of a Down. So she would come home and say, man, Tom Morello was talking about you all day. And I'm like, Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine was talking about me? And she goes, yeah, he loves you. And I'm like, really? I didn't even know he knew who I was. You know what I mean? So Lisa and I started doing Praise the Dead shows around town. And we did this one show and we opened for Tom. And Tom gave us such a stunning introduction, I couldn't even come on stage. He was like, man, this guy, I idolized this guy, and he, you know, he was in this band Sound Barrier and blah, blah, blah. I was like, wow, I didn't even know he knew that. You know, so then from then on, Tom and I and Lisa we've been close friends ever since. So he kept asking about putting the band back together. And I was saying, well, you know, our drummer passed away. Dave Brown, our drummer, passed away in 2013 from cancer. So we ended up getting another drummer, and we did the thing at the Whiskey and started writing material for a new album. And we kind of stopped a little bit because the material, like when we first got back together, I was like, I don't want to have anything to do with the 80s. This is 2000, you know, 20, 19, whatever it was, and I didn't want to do any of that because I wanted to show our progression, and we always wondered what would we sound like if we didn't break up, if we just kept going, you know what I mean? So I started writing this really progressive, like 8-string music with my new influences, you know, being Animals.
Show people that guitar you have there with the 8 strings.
This is called the Spacecraft.
And what are the extra 2 strings? What notes are they?
They're lower strings. So for me, I was telling you, I tune in open D tuning. So it's D, A, D, A, D, F sharp, A, D, low to high. And there's a whole story behind this guitar as well. Like, it's a crazy story, you know. But I'll get to it in a minute though. Back to the Sound Barrier stuff. Like, once we, you know, got back together with Tom and started writing this music, I was like, this doesn't sound like Sound Barrier. You know, so we went back to the drawing board and started writing more stuff. I started embracing the 80s more. So this newer stuff that we're going to come out with now has a little bit of the 80s influence in it, you know. And actually this next single we're going to release is one of the songs we used to open our set with. We used to open with instrumentals. So the reason why it was instrumentals because back then Bernie couldn't think of enough, you know, lyrics to write to this stuff. Because Stanley and I was coming up with so much music. We have like about 5 albums worth of music that we've never even recorded yet. You know what I mean? So we decided to take at least 2 or 3 songs off from that time period and update them and add them to the newer stuff that we're doing now. So this song is one of the instrumentals we used to do back then. And Bernie finally put lyrics to it, and it's called Blindfolded Soldiers. And I don't know what people are going to say about it, but we just got to call it as we see it. The song is about the insurrection of the Capitol.
Pretty timely.
That's all I'm going to say about it. And the thing is, like, we're not saying this or that. We're just calling what we see. You know, this is what happened, you know. So that's going to be our next single. We were going to put out a song before this, and we still may put it out, but it's really progressive and aggressive. And if you look at that thing that we did with the reunion show, we played it there. The song was called "The Strangest Thing," and we went back in the studio and really did it up really nice. And it's going to still come out, but we went back to the drawing board and just decided it didn't really sound like us. It sounded like me. Because see, what happened was that song was going to be on one of my solo albums. I was working on a solo album at the time that Tom got in touch with us. So the only material I had to contribute to the 5 songs that Tom wanted to hear was my solo material, and that was one of the songs.
So are you guys recording remotely, or did you get together in person? Or?
Yeah, we were doing it all remotely. Bernie and I did it all remotely. Well, we didn't even see each other. I did music, sent it to him. He put vocals on it, and then we did a rough mix on it and sent it to Tom. So the song that that he picked first was a song called "I'm Just a Man," and that was one of Bernie's old demos that he had that we never played before, but Tom liked it, so that's the first song we did, and that's the one that we released.
So you think an album before 2021's over?
We decided to cut it down instead of an album, like a 6-song EP, because then we can get it done a lot faster, and we don't want our fans to have to wait too much longer for new music, you know.
Wow, well, that's something to look forward
Waiting
to.
for a while now, as it is, you know. We don't want to waiting too much longer, you know.
You mentioned Praise the Dead, so as long as, you know, you mentioned it, I was really not familiar, but, you know, leading up to this, I checked it out. So with Lisa, you said, right? And so I was thinking, wow, this is sort of like a metal White Stripes.
Kind of, yeah. The difference is Lisa can sing her ass off, so she's the vocalist and the drummer.
Yeah.
So her on vocals and drums and me on 8-string guitar. That's the band. It's power. We call it a power duo. You know, so we have a new single coming out soon too, called "Dead to Me," and that's really intense. Bill Matoyer and Doug Pennick from King's X helped us with that song, engineered and helped us produce it and stuff.
How'd you decide that you would, you know, make music just the two of you?
Well, once we got together, I thought she was such a great drummer because we met now. We've been together about over 15 years. And what happened was we were touring. I was touring with Fishbone, and we did a tour together with King's X. So it was Fishbone, King's X, and we would co-headline. We would take turns headlining different venues. And when we played in Colorado, Lisa was there, and got to meet her, and she sat in with us, and when we jammed after the concert and stuff, and I was like, wow, you're a great drummer. We should get together and do some music together. I'd love to produce you or something and work with you, you know. So she came out to LA, and we started writing music together and stuff, and then we did that first batch of Praise the Dead music, which was like in 2012. And the ironic thing about that was Tom Morello, as strange as it was going to sign Praise the Dead. He heard that stuff and he loved it, you know. And but what happened was sound barrier. He wanted to put the sound barrier thing back together, and that kind of took precedence over the Praise the Dead thing, you know.
You don't find you miss the bass at all?
Say it again. Oh, in Praise the Dead?
Yeah.
Well, actually, I'm playing bass on it too. See, what we're doing is like a lot of bands nowadays, and it's funny because Lisa and I used to think back in the day, I used to think it was cheating if you play the tracks, you know. I'm like, well, why are they doing that? What are you doing? But we never did it, and we used to laugh about it. So we said, you know what? It'd be interesting to play to some of our tracks, you know, because we've both never done it before. So what we do is I have a loop station, and I have all my bass parts in the loop station with a click track and some rhythm guitars and some background vocals here and there. Mm-hmm. And I step on that. She's got the click track in her ear, and we play live guitar and drums and vocals over it.
Okay.
And it sounds awesome too. It's phenomenal. I love that too.
Wow.
And now, like, everybody does that. I mean, my favorite band of today does that. Animals as Leaders. They're playing to their tracks. You know, a lot of bands do it. You know, and I know some people don't like it at all. Some people are like, that's not real. You're not playing, you know. But for me, it's like, when I see those people play, they're really playing. You know, it's not like a tape of the they're playing live over their bass tracks, you know, or their keyboard tracks or something. And the drummer's really playing to it, and the guitars are really playing to it, and people are really singing over it. So I could see it's not lip syncing, you know what I mean?
Right.
Lip syncing is a whole nother thing, you know what I mean? And I could never do that. I mean, Lisa's too good of a vocalist to lip sync, you know. She despises it, you know. So I don't know if you ever heard any of that stuff, but it's really heavy and it's really intense.
Yeah. Well, I saw some on YouTube. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it was very, very interesting. Yeah. I'd like to hear some more.
Yes. That single's coming. Dead to Me will be out soon, you know.
Cool.
We're going to work on another EP as well.
So you're kind of juggling like three things right now, right? Because the funk experience.
Yes.
Yeah. At least 3.
Yes. And that was very cool too, because what happened with that was like last year we all met in Asheville, and the goal was to put together an EPK so we could start touring. So we went there, rehearsed because we stayed there for about a month. Rehearsed for a few weeks, couple weeks, and then did 2 live shows, recorded them all, and filmed everything. And we got a residency in Las Vegas, and the whole thing got canceled because of COVID.
Wow, that sounds great. I mean, people can probably still catch some of those clips. I know at least they were on YouTube at one time. Maybe they still are. Yeah, it sounds great. I mean, those tracks. Oof.
I mean, Maggot Brain is just phenomenal. I mean, it's just because, I've heard a lot of people play Maggot Brain, and I tried to get every part perfect. You know what I mean? Because that song is just one of the soundtracks of my life. And if you hear that stuff, that's what my goal is. That's what like I was telling you earlier, is to get the feel of somebody and make people really feel, what that song was. And that's like, I don't know if you know Gabe Gonzalez.
Oh, yeah. He's been on the show.
Curry, Lodge too?
Yeah, he's been on.
When I met Lodge, he said, man, you are something else. I was like, what are you talking about? He said, me and Gabe almost went to blows over you. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, well, Gabe played me some tracks of you, and I thought it was Eddie. And I'm telling him it's Eddie, and he's like, man, that is not Eddie. I'm telling you, it's not. And they were going to fight over it. I was like, man, what are you trying to trick me? That's Eddie. No, it's not, man. I'm telling you, it's not Eddie. It's Spacey T.
Wow.
So it's funny, how it gets so close.
There's much more to this great Truth and Rhythm interview. Just continue on to the next part of the episode. Also, be sure to subscribe to this channel. If you've already done so, please share it with friends. And become a member by joining Truth and Rhythm on Patreon, or consider donating at funkandstuff.net. Thank you very much.